Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randle and Gus Kearns.
Now is time to press. Now is time to up our game. College football has ended. College basketball has taken center stage. Tonight, I'm sitting here flipping between ESPN and ESPN2 and ESPNU and CBS game after game after game. Great matchup after great matchup. Now is the time for our podcast, for Gus and myself, to up our game and start pushing the envelope. More podcasts, more guests, more coaches. We got Joe Mihalik of Hofstra Pride on this week. Talked to him about how his team is doing so well out there in Long Island. 10 consecutive wins. And Justin Wright Foreman, how underappreciated he is. We have another Division I major college basketball coach coming on soon for you. We have beat reporters. We have previews of games. Gus and I are doing all of these things, fishy lines, predictions. And now today we up our game even further. Why? For you. For the fans, the listeners who support the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast. Today we have Jon Rothstein, one of the biggest and best college basketball minds in America. He's agreed to come on and give us a few minutes and give us insight. And let me tell you, I fired the questions at Jon and he hit them right back. He gives you detail. He gives you analysis. He gives you facts. He can dive deep on any team at a moment's notice. So we have Jon Rothstein here, college basketball insider for CBS Sports and WFAN. You can follow him on Twitter at Jon Rothstein. He is going to give us deep analysis. He's going to talk about Nevada. Should we be worried after their loss? He's going to talk about Duke versus Virginia. Who is the leader in the ACC? He's going to talk about Kentucky or Tennessee or Auburn or other. Who's the best team in the SEC? And then he's going to go on the couch with me. I'm going to put the clock on. I'm going to fire rapid fire questions at him and he's going to knock them out of the park. Folks, we are pushing for guests. We are getting more people on. We're producing more podcasts. All for you. And if you want even more content, please go to patreon.com, search for Screen the Screener, and become a patron. For just $6, you get an extra 40-minute, usually more, ask the patrons, video log where we give you a deep analysis of the games on the weekend. We preview the games for you. We tell you who's going to win. We make picks against the spread. And we've been right a heck of a lot. When Gonzaga played North Carolina, we told you North Carolina was going to blow them out. When Villanova traveled to Kansas, we told you it'll be a close game, but we'll take Villanova and the points. When Arizona State beat Kansas, we told you it was going to happen before it happened. When Kentucky played Louisville and everyone was split, Gus and I were unanimous. It was going to be Kentucky on the road at Louisville, and we were right. And this week, we laughed about Kansas going to Iowa State, told you we would have given the points and even given a lot of them, and we would have been right. So if you're interested in getting more Screen the Screener, become a patron on patreon.com for Screen the Screener. We have more content coming for you. And today, it all starts, our attack, our college basketball, January to April full court press starts today with Jon Rothstein of CBS Sports and WFAN. Please follow him on Twitter at Jon Rothstein. This was a phenomenal interview with Jon. Please enjoy. Folks, when you want to talk college basketball, there is only one person to go to, and that is Jon Rothstein, college basketball insider for CBS Sports and WFAN. He is the host of the College Hoops Today podcast for Compass Media, and he's an AP voter as well. Please follow him on Twitter. Amazing follow at Jon Rothstein. We are honored to have him here for a few minutes on the Screen the Screener podcast. Jon, thanks so much for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm great. Great to be with you guys.
So let's start with Kansas, Jon. Junior center Udoka Azubuike is out for the year with the wrist injury. Kansas has the 14 straight Big 12 regular season titles, but I've talked about this over the last few weeks. They've won their last few titles with a superstar Big 12 Player of the Year-like point guard, Frank Mason, Devontae Graham. When they really needed it, those guys stepped forward. The inexperience in the backcourt does concern me a little. Devin Dotson has been solid, but Quentin Grimes really has struggled from three. He was 3 of 6 against Iowa State, but he's only at 31% 100% on the year. Vic, of course, roller coaster, and him himself go back and forth a little bit. Kansas or the field, John? What do you think this year in the Big 12?
Kansas, because there's an unwritten rule in the Big 12, regardless of personnel, regardless of injuries, it's that until another team proves that they're capable of winning a Big 12 regular season title, you have to give the nod to Kansas. What's interesting to me is, last year, and I had talked to Bill Self about this, he really enjoyed coaching a team that was able to be featured in a four-guard alignment. Now, the big difference between the team that Bill Self coached last year and the one that Kansas is going to now have moving forward with four perimeter players around Dedrick Lawson is the team last year was significantly better shooting the basketball. The personnel for Kansas is obviously different this year, but there's still enough talent, in my opinion, for the Jayhawks to win the Big 12 regular season title.
You said something on your podcast that we fully support here. You talked about the ACC, and you feel it still goes through Charlottesville. Totally agree. Cavs are only 2-5 in their last 7 versus Duke, but all of those have been close games. Of course, Virginia won at Cameron last year, 65-63. There's a lot of good teams in the ACC. North Carolina, NC State, Syracuse is getting better. But this year, for the first time in a while, Virginia and Duke actually play twice. UVA has 3 regular season titles in the last 5 years. Duke's last regular season title, this may shock people, in the ACC 2010 when they tied with Maryland. Road to the ACC regular season titles got to go through Charlottesville, right?
Yeah, I've been saying this for a long time, and, I firmly believe that even, Virginia lost, and it was an epic and an all-time loss. One of the things that wasn't really discussed at great length about that defeat against UMBC was the fact that Virginia wasn't playing with DeAndre Hunter. What we've seen during the NCAA tournament for the most part is the guys who are capable of performing at the next level are generally the ones that carry you. We have seen that, obviously the past couple of years in certain instances. You obviously saw it, last year with Mikal Bridges at Villanova. You've seen it with other teams as well who advance deep into the field. And now you're in a scenario, for all intents and purposes, where when Virginia lost last year, obviously the focus was on the defeat, but nobody talked about the fact that DeAndre Hunter was not available for the Cavaliers in that game. And, if DeAndre Hunter was available, I don't know if Virginia would have went to the Final Four. They had a very tough draw, but I don't think they would have lost to UMBC. So now all of a sudden I think we have a storyline out there that has the makings of an unbelievable success story. Because think about this for a second. Duke last year had Trayvon Duval, Grayson Allen, Gary Trent Jr., Marvin Bagley III, and Wendell Carter all in its starting lineup. And Virginia won the ACC regular season title by 4 games. That's a fact of life. And they also won the ACC tournament title. So when I look at Virginia this year compared to last, I see a better basketball team. And if I look at Virginia's team last season, I see a team that obviously had a chance to go to a Final Four. So I think that the Cavs, because of the evolution of Jack Salt, because of the addition of Kihei Clark, they're a better basketball team than they were last season, and to me that makes them the favorite in the ACC.
John, completely agree with you about Hunter, and I've been saying this in the last 6 months as well. People talk about that loss of 1 losing to a 16. First of all, no Hunter changes the game. Secondly, I don't think it was that big a difference from a Michigan State team that was favored to win the title a few years ago, losing to Middle Tennessee State, a Duke team losing to Lehigh. Missouri lost to Norfolk State that year as well. I kind of think they're in the same area. Without Hunter, I don't think that's a true 1 versus 16 a loss there.
I agree with you 100%.
In that game, that Virginia game, big win over Florida State. Of course, Florida State presses the backups there, John, coming in at the end of the game against the student managers. Your thoughts on that? I thought that was an odd move there by Leonard Hamilton.
Yeah, coaches are competitive. They want to obviously make the game as close as it can be. So I don't read too much into it. It's just conference play. It's super competitive.
Speaking of teams that are undefeated, one that still should be, in my mind, is St. John's. You got to see them up close and personal recently. Does that smaller lineup look sustainable? How good is Shamori Pons? And then I heard you say something on your podcast, which is amazing. They're playing Villanova tonight. Is that correct that in the Jay Wright era, St. John's has never won on campus in Villanova?
Yeah, Jay Wright has never lost a game on campus at the Pavilion of St. John's since he's been the Wildcats head coach. So St. John's again playing for a piece of history. The thing I think that you have to like about St. John's is just how hard they are to guard. You look right now offensively, all 5 of their starters are shooting 46% or better from the field. They're shooting 40% as a team from 3-point range. But the big difference right now, I think, for St. John's is the fact that they have somebody in the low post in C.D. Keita who can guard bigger players if they face them, like they obviously did against Georgetown on Saturday. And the most underrated thing about C.D. Keita is the way he's able to switch ball screens defensively, and you saw in spurts he could step out and guard a guard and things like that. So St. John's, to me, when they added Mustafa Aaron, had the most talented roster in the Big East, and I think we've seen right now through the first 2 months of the season that sentiment is, truly holding true to form. So I don't think there's any doubt right now that this is the most talented team in a league that is, really as balanced as it's been since realignment.
And we talk about teams that fell from the undefeated ranks. How about Nevada? They lose big at the pit against New Mexico. I have Nevada in my Final Four. I'm not worried. I just think it was one of those stumbles. They were getting off to slow starts. Eventually they were going to get caught. This still a Final Four contending team for you? Or does that loss worry you a little bit?
It all depends on the draw. I don't think it's fair right now sometimes to, prognosticate about things like that when we're 10 weeks away from Selection Sunday. What Nevada right now is dealing with is this was a program that probably about 2 years ago under Eric Musselman was an upstart, was a team that, a lot of people looked at that could be one of the better teams in the Mountain West. And now all of a sudden it has become the flagship program in the Mountain West in just 2 years. So anytime Nevada goes on the road, if they lose the game is ending with a court storm. So that's something, too, that those Nevada players are going to have to adjust to. But I also think you need to look at, Nevada. They may not have the schedule that other power conference teams have, went out and played, but they still played teams that have a chance to play in the NCAA tournament. Tulsa's a team in the American Conference. They're going to play Cincinnati this week that's had a couple of big wins already under its belt. Tulsa's beaten Kansas State. They've beaten Oklahoma State. They've obviously been in the scenario where they beat Arizona State on the neutral court at the Staples Center. That win a couple of weeks ago looked better before Arizona State lost to both Princeton and Utah at home. They've beaten a very good South Dakota State team who's going to be a very difficult matchup in the NCAA tournament because they have a five-man and Mike Down who can shoot threes. So I think it's a long season. I think, especially now when you're in a mid-major league that's a one-bid conference, you have to be able to take everybody's best punch, and that's what Eric Musselman's dealing with right now.
There are two teams that have sort of been inconsistent that we're having trouble getting a read on. I want to get your thoughts. The first one, of course, is Seton Hall, who had some big wins early in the year. Of course, they had the win against St. John's, which maybe they shouldn't have had. But then, of course, now they lose at DePaul. Thoughts on Seton Hall moving forward? Is this defensive team and Miles Powell team that can make the tournament, or do you think maybe that they were achieving a little bit over their head and they may take a step back?
Seton Hall, to me, as much as any team in college basketball, deserves credit for the way that they went out and scheduled. You look at Seton Hall, and Kevin Willard was unafraid to play people. He got a game with Kentucky to guard, and he started a home-and-home series with Maryland. He started a home-and-home series with St. Louis, who obviously is, and was the favorite, preseason in the Atlantic 10. So when I look at Seton Hall, I see a team that has one outstanding player in Miles Powell, and, guys who need to prove themselves around him. So, the loss, obviously, to DePaul on Sunday was a product of conference play. I thought DePaul deserved to win the game, but Seton Hall has built equity right now in the non-conference portion of the schedule with the Kentucky win, with the Maryland win. So, and they also, have a win over St. John's, which, controversial or not, is going to carry weight moving forward. So, for all intents and purposes, Seton Hall, I think, would have to play themselves out moving forward.
Curious to get your take on Wichita State. This is a team under Greg Marshall that was so solid defensively for many years. They make the move to the American Athletic Conference, and all of a sudden last year they dropped down to 101.9, 111th in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency. They get knocked out in the first round against Marshall, and this year again they are struggling on defense. Just curious your take with the Shockers. This was a team that almost beat Kentucky a few years ago. They did make a Final Four. Greg Marshall's done an outstanding job, but why have they struggled defensively, in your opinion, since moving to the AAC?
Last year was not a vintage Greg Marshall defensive team. That team was cut out to score the basketball with Shamet and Frankamp and company. The personnel of that team was more offensive-minded. And this year's team, you have a group of players who came into this season who just hadn't been a part of college basketball before, with the exception, obviously, of Samaje Hennions-Jones and Marcus McDuffie. So generally, when you have young teams, you're not going to be great defensively.
And let's head over to the Pac-12. Of course, the Pac-12 has really been struggling this year. I saw Arizona State versus Nevada. I love their effort. I love them against Dort. Remy Martin had just returned for them. And then all of a sudden they go out, they lose back-to-back home losses to Princeton and Utah. Of course, UCLA with the coaching change, they've had home losses to Liberty and Belmont. No bowl now for Oregon. They lost at home to Oregon State and Tres Tinkle. Handicap the Pac-12 first. What do you think is going on in that conference?
I think when you look at the Pac-12 right now, there's so many different issues for this league as a whole. The first is obviously the scenario that exists, and you hate to say this, but the Pac-12 has to start behaving like a high major program. The Pac-12 needs to have all of its programs charter because they want to be obviously viewed as a power conference and be a conference that can have results in the NCAA tournament in a positive fashion. You have to act like you belong in a power league. You have to charter. And that obviously is directly going to correlate to the type of television schedule you have because we have seen scenarios. I think USC is going to Oregon this week to play Oregon State and Oregon. USC is going to get up to Oregon to play Oregon State Thursday. They're going to get up there Wednesday night, and they're going to pretty much not be anywhere else until they get home Sunday night. They're going to hang around in the Great Northwest for a couple days. If you were chartering, you could be back in Los Angeles Thursday night and then fly back Saturday night. That's not an option because of what you're dealing with within the league. That's one of the things that, why I think a lot of people who are in good situations are not going to consider leaving a good situation to take the UCLA job. So getting charters under your belt is one thing you have to obviously do if you're the Pac-12. The second thing you have to do is you have to make sure that your network is seen by everybody nationally. I watch as much college basketball as I can. I get really frustrated if I'm not working and I'm out, at a restaurant or a bar and I want to watch a game and you can't get the Pac-12 network.
Totally agree.
That's just not good. That's just not good for business. I remember last year, Arizona and Arizona State were playing early in the season and I wasn't working and I was going out with friends and I wanted to make sure I could watch this game, and you're calling different bars and establishments in New York to make sure that they have the Pac-12 network. That's something that's hampering the league. Another thing that hampers the league is this. Because they want to talk about travel partners because they think it helps travel with the league and so on and so forth. That needs to be eliminated. And you also, in addition to that, need to be in a scenario, and again, travel partners being eliminated would be easier if you were able to charter. You have to be in a scenario where if you look at things, you are more than comfortable making sure that your best teams are going to play each other. I mean, there is no reason that Arizona and UCLA don't play every year, twice. There's no reason for that. There's no reason that this season Washington, a team that returned its top 8 scorers from last year, doesn't get a chance to play Arizona State twice and doesn't get to play them once in Seattle. You're not putting your teams and your best teams in a position to make the NCAA tournament because you're limiting the amount of opportunities they're going to get quad one wins because you want to satisfy travel partners, and also for all intents and purposes, you want to satisfy this scheduling model that you did and you put in place, the Pac-12 put it in place, to make things easier for their teams. But the real way to make things easier for their teams would just to be to charter.
I totally remember that Arizona State game. I was in the same situation. I ordered some sort of TV service through the computer to attach the computer to the television just in order to get that game on the TV. So I completely understand that. Absolutely. In the SEC, John, let's take a look. Kentucky sort of started to separate there. Big win over North Carolina. Ashton Hagen's 8 steals, everything. But Tennessee's still hanging around. You got a lot of good teams there. Auburn, of course, is solid, but I think they have a tricky game at Mississippi with Kermit Davis there. So talk about the SEC a little bit. Is it Tennessee and Kentucky and the rest of the field, or do you sort of think that there's a mix in there that can make a move like a Mississippi State?
Look, I said since the beginning of, I think, the summer that I felt that Tennessee and Auburn would have been ahead of Kentucky to start the season. And I'm not wavering from that proclamation. And I think, the way the start of the season has obviously went, those two teams have played better than Kentucky out of the gate. Now, I do want to give Kentucky credit for playing outstanding basketball against both North Carolina and Louisville. But to me, Tennessee is the clear best team. I think when you look at the 2, 3, 4 area, it's some combination of Auburn, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. And then the forgotten team in the SEC is LSU. LSU had Florida State beat in November in Orlando. Fiondu Kabengele, if you remember, got a shooter's touch on a three-point shot that helped Florida State get a win. And that difficult loss for LSU allowed them to really sleepwalk against Oklahoma State. They got beat handedly in that game. And then they had, I think, a 15 or a 13-point lead in the second half at Houston, and they lost that game. So LSU is a team that, I think really is forgotten, but still has the ability and talent to be a second weekend team.
John, this is incredible stuff. We really thank you for a few minutes. Last thing we'll do here, which we do with all people like yourself, we're going to put you on the couch. I'm going to put the clock on here for 1 minute. We're going to fire a bunch of college basketball questions at you. Rapid fire here. Just give us our first reaction, and then we'll get you out of here, okay?
Go ahead.
Here we go. Better player, Justin Wright Foreman of Hofstra or Chris Clemens of Campbell?
Justin Wright Foreman.
More NCAA tournament bids this year, Pac-12 or A-10?
Well, tie at 1.
A-10 regular season champ, VCU, Davidson, or the Field?
Field.
Will the Ivy League have a Sweet 16 team this year?
No.
Buffalo getting at large bid if they don't win the conference tournament?
To be determined. Depends what happens in other conference tournaments.
Same question for Furman.
No.
Bigger surprise, if NC State finishes in the top 3 in the ACC or North Carolina finishes 4th or below?
NC State finishes in the top 3.
Does Mark Few ever leave Gonzaga?
No.
Better chance to make the NCAA tournament, Ole Miss or Florida?
Florida.
Second best team in the West Coast Conference, San Francisco, St. Mary, or other?
San Francisco.
I say Washington is going to make a Syracuse-like run like in 2016 in the tournament. Crazy or not crazy?
Crazy because Washington is going to have to get in the tournament first, which means it wouldn't have to win the Pac-12 tournament the way things look right now.
Does Nevada lose another game in the Mountain West this year?
Yes.
Stony Brook, Vermont, or the Field in the America East?
Vermont.
Does Houston lose at Temple tomorrow night?
No.
Last undefeated team to lose, Michigan, Virginia, or Houston?
Michigan. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to say Virginia.
Virginia. The best place to dine in Boston that you found on your road trips?
In Boston, Massachusetts, Oak Room, Copley Square, Oak Bar.
Fair enough. Very good. Folks, that is Jon Rothstein, one of the best in the business, college basketball insider for CBS Sports and WFAN. Please follow him on Twitter at Jon Rothstein. If you love college basketball, he's the guy to go to. John, can't thank you enough for your schedule, for giving us a few minutes here. We'll be watching for you the rest of the season.
Thanks, man.
Thanks so much.